Um, I'm a kid, I go to my guitar lesson, I'm probably like 13, 14, and I was learning how to play House of the Rising Sun, and I thought I was bad. Man, I could play the heck out of that song. Gone through the whole Mel Daybook, I was on it. So I go into my lesson, and the kid before me hadn't shown up. So my guitar teacher was just in there playing a couple records, and I walk in and I hear this music. What the heck is that? So I said, what the heck is that? And he said, well, that's jazz. And I said, well, cool. Who is that? He goes, oh, it's this guy named Wes Montgomery. I said, wow, that's really, really neat. And I remember, so we did my lesson, and I played House of the Rising Sun, but I couldn't get this sound that this guy was getting out of my head. So at the end of the lesson, I asked him, would you mind if I borrowed a couple of these albums? So I took him home, and I played them, and I played them, and I figured out a couple of licks, the easy ones, not the hard ones. And I went back, and I was all proud of myself. It's like, yeah, I did the lesson you wanted me to do, but check out this lick that I learned off the record. And there was no looking back. Wes Montgomery's the guy that did it for me. For a lot of reasons, he had this amazing sound, and I'd never really heard a guitar player that had that sound. And part of it was that he played with his thumb and not with a guitar pick. And the story that I heard was that he was had to practice late at night, and because he worked during the day, he had worked during the day and then did his practicing at night. And so he didn't want to wake up his wife and kids, so he just practiced with his thumb so it wouldn't be so loud. But be that as it may, he had this great sound. And I just wanted to demonstrate real quick the difference. Most jazz guitar players, not all, but most players most of the time use a guitar pick. And it's just this little plastic jobber. They're different shapes and thicknesses and whatnot. But I like the red ones because when I drop them on the floor, I can see them. But it gets it gets a really cool sound. But when you play with your thumb, hear the difference? It's a little bit rounder, fuller, something going on that's really nice. So Wes did that. Also, he was known for using octaves, and if you've ever had any music lessons, you know that there's 8 notes in the scale. So that's a G, and if you go up the scale 8 notes, that's your next G. If you play them both at the same time, you're playing 2 Gs, and that's called an octave. And instead of playing, like Wes would never play that song that way, he would play, and he'd play 2 Gs separated by 8 notes, and it sounded really, really cool. He was also brilliant at playing these sort of chord melody. He'd play solos that actually used chords. So he might play. And between the cool sound and his phrasing and the octaves and the chords, he was just a brilliant player, and he was a huge influence on me and Rich. I'm sure for you as well. So we're gonna drag Rich up again. We're gonna play a tune recorded by Wes. He actually started recording with his brothers. He had a brother that played bass and another brother that played vibes, and they played in this group called the Master Sounds. And then Wes went on and started his own solo career, and it released a whole bunch of great albums. We're going to play a tune of his called Road Song. Gosh, when did this come out? In the mid-'60s?
Yeah, I'd say like 67.
Okay.
Something like that.
So we're gonna play this tune, and during our solos, I'm sure that in different ways we're gonna try to channel Wes a little bit here, and I'm sure you'll hear some octaves and some chord melodies and all kinds of good stuff. All right, shall we? but Rich and I play together. We do some duo things, but we also play in a group. What do we call that group now? The Guitar Summit?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's somewhere between 2 and 3 or 4 guitar players that get together, and it's really, really fun. So just another hand for Rich. Did I play the Wes Montgomery recording? No. I just got to play just a little snippet because he's my guy. This is called West Coast Blues. I would love to play the whole thing, but looking at the clock here. So, Tom, we're going to hit that next slide, and we're going to jump ahead a little bit to the 1960s. Now, sometimes we can be a little bit ethnocentric in the jazz world and just assume that everybody, everything's American, and of course this is the birthplace of jazz, but as we learned from Django, you can't keep a good thing to yourself. So a lot of Brazilian musicians had been playing their unique blend of European and African and indigenous musical cultures down there for a long time. But when they sort of got the jazz ingredient mixed into this, what came from then was this great music genre in the 60s called bossa nova. And it became very popular, especially with a lot of people that maybe thought that some jazz was a little too crazy or out there or frantic, and maybe they heard Charlie Parker and said, oh, that's just too crazy for me. But they would hear Antonio Carlos Jobim or Stan Getz play The Girl from Ipanema and go, oh, I could have wine and cheese with this. This is awesome. But it's beautiful. It's amazing music. And as I have here in my wonderful notes, it just has this. Well, I love Brazilian music, and if there's reincarnation, please let me come back as a Brazilian guitar player, because I'll be a happy guy. But there's some of my favorite players are listed down there on the bottom, and some are some names that you may be familiar with. But Dudu Fonseca is probably a name that you went, who in the heck is that guy? But he's really, really cool, and a lot of these musicians are people that you can find nowadays on YouTube and in some other cases. Has anybody ever heard of a film called Black Orpheus? Yeah. It's a beautiful film. It's the Orpheus legend, only set during the Carnival in Rio, and I believe the film came out, I want to say 63 or 63. Is that right? Okay. And it's a great story. It's a beautiful film, but the music, oh my gosh! And there's so much great Brazilian music that has come from being inspired by that film. So there's a guitar player, an American guy actually named Charlie Bird, who's going to either record in just a little bit of him playing a tune called Desafinados, which is by Jobim. And I'd like you to hear just enough of this to kind of whet your appetite. you can see, we've kind of come full circle, and we're back now to playing an acoustic guitar. This particular guitar, though, is a nylon string, which maybe you have to be a guitar, guitar maniac to really care. But the nylon string guitar is what is used for classical guitar music, and also a different version of it for flamenco music. And it's that nylon string played with the fingers individually that gives you the ability to get that kind of sound. I'm just curious, has anyone here ever heard the recording, the original recording of Girl from Ipanema? Can you raise your hand if you've heard that before? You should check it out sometime. The person that's known for recording it is a sax player named Stan Getz, and I have his name on there. But the interesting story about that is that the woman that sang the vocal on that, her name is Astrid Gilberto, she, that was the demo of the song. She was not considered to be a very good singer at all, and she was just kind of a warm body. It's like, hey, we need somebody to sing this song. You, Astrid, get over here, sing this song. And so she sang it in a very non-diva-esque way. And when people heard her sort of sultry, understated version of the tune, and then Stan Getz played this great tenor sax solo, and man, I think that was the hit. That was the bossa nova hit that I think did it for a lot of people. So that would be something worth checking out too.
Carnegie Hall. They have the recording.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, that's what popularized bossa nova in the States.
Yeah, I don't have that recording. I do remember that as a kid, my dad had a few jazz records, and that was one of them. And I remember kind of sneaking in, playing the forbidden parental records that you're not supposed to touch, going, oh, this is cool, because he had some Dave Brubeck and he had that stuff. And I was really little and I didn't know anything about music. This is before I played any instruments or anything. But I just was attracted to the sound. So maybe when I went to my guitar lesson that time, that's why the planets aligned. Tom, let's hit that next slide and we'll press on to my guy. When I first heard Joe Pass play, I wanted to sell all my guitars and just go into something else. He is just beyond brilliant. He's a guy that he's from back east, but he's kind of known for being an LA player, and he played on all these kind of funky, 60s rock kind of things in the recording studios, because that's what a lot of guys did to make money, because they sure weren't going to make it playing jazz. There was an organization called Synanon that was a drug and alcohol rehabilitation group, and because so many jazz musicians struggled with that particular affliction, they put together some great bands. So his first notoriety came as part of this thing called the Sounds of Synanon tour, and he was a brilliant player. I'll play a little bit for you in a second here. Just amazing player and great technique. There's some trio recordings of him, and duo recordings with Oscar Peterson. Is anybody familiar with Oscar Peterson? Both of those guys can play 1,000,000 miles an hour and make it sound like they just woke up. It's so effortless and so brilliant. He has a great duo album with Joe Pass and Ella Fitzgerald, and to me that's that combination of those the two giants of guitar and jazz vocals, and that's a superb album. And then he's got a series of recordings called Virtuoso, and the name kind of says it all. It's just Joe playing an unamplified guitar, no band, just him. And it's jaw-droppingly, I mean, if you're a guitar player, your jaw will drop. If you're not a guitar player, your jaw will just fall down a little bit. But it's really, really good. When I was in school at Fresno State, the bass player in the jazz band when I was there had a cousin who was in the studio scene in LA. And his cousin told my friend, the bass player, that he knew Joe Pass. And so my friend said, hey, my cousin can get you a lesson with Joe Pass. And I said, sure, right. So remember, he came into rehearsal and he handed me a little scrap of paper one day, and it was Joe's phone number down in Van Nuys. And oh my God, I'm going to call Joe Pass. So I finally got the courage to do it, called him up, nicest guy in the world, and I was able to take lessons from my hero. And I have to tell you the story. For me, meeting Joe Pass would be like meeting, I don't know, the president and the Pope and Buster Posey, and I couldn't fathom that I was going to meet this guy. And I thought, well, he's going to live in a palace and he's going to have minions that you know, open the door for him. So I go to this little house in Van Nuys, very, very, very modest, open the door. Here comes Joe Pass in a wife beater t-shirt with a little fried egg yolk stain kind of going down the front. He looked like my Uncle Al. And it's, okay. But it was the start of there's some recordings. We were able to bring Joe up to Fresno State and to play with the jazz band there. And he and I got to play some duets and talk about Cloud Nine. So I'm a huge Joe Pass fan, and let me just play a little something for you. And then Rich and I are going to do our version of the Joe Pass approach here. But this is a tune called How Deep is the Ocean? And this is off one of the Virtuoso albums. Just one guitar player. Trust me, that's a flawless recording. So if I can entice Rich to come up, and we're going to play a tune called Autumn Leaves, and I think we're going to do it in kind of in the style of Joe and Joe. You want to be Joe or Joe? Do you have any Joe Pass stories, Rich?
You know, I do. I took 2 lessons from him, and I was the same way. It's like, oh my gosh, going to meet Joe Pass, unbelievable. And I wish I would have saved the canceled check because he signed it.
I had the same thing. I said, oh man, why did I not keep that check?
But anyway, you know, I didn't know anything about jazz or anything, you know, but so he says, let me see where you're at here, buddy. He was kind of rough around the edges.
Yeah.
And he says, pretend you're a horn player at the end of a big band arrangement and they blow out that big chord at the end, and you're the horn player and you're going to play this big credenza. Let me hear you do something. So he does this. So I just go. And he says, is that it? Go home and learn harmonic minor. I didn't know why, but yeah. He was kind of like that.
And I believe that the head of the jazz guitar department at USC is a fellow named Frank Potenza, and Tom, help me out here. He's going to be here in the spring.
One of the jazz at the libraries this spring.
Oh, wow.
And because he's doing a documentary on Joe, or he's done one.
Right.
Yeah. So that'll be a good thing. So we're going to play this tune called Autumn Leaves.
Why don't we start off? I'll play the
Okay. Okay. I knew this was going to happen. I knew it was going to be 8:15. It's like, oh, we got to talk about all these other guys. Tom, hit that slide. So, of course, what happened in the very, very late 60s and 70s is that the rock players were influencing jazz players and vice versa. And it sort of reminded me, there used to be a commercial where a guy had a chocolate bar and a guy had some peanut butter, and they tripped, and they got mixed up, and then, hey, let's have Reese's peanut butter cups. Yeah. So jazz fusion is this blending of these two disparate but yet wonderful kinds of music. And there was just some great, great musicians that came up from this era. John McLaughlin is one of the first ones. You'll see that he has a more complex name than John McLaughlin. In the 60s, some of you may remember that people were trying to find the meaning of life in a lot of ways. Some of them spiritual, some of them pharmaceutical, all sorts of different things. But the big fascination with Indian religion, culture, philosophy, and music, and John McLaughlin was heavily influenced by that. So his Indian spiritual name is Mahavishnu, and there's a group called the Mahavishnu Orchestra that was one of my very favorite bands back in the day that were combining rock and roll and Indian influences. And I'll just play a little snippet because I am keeping my eye on the clock here. But you need to hear at least a little bit of something called Vital Transformation. Even the title is deep. Even the sound of that guitar, it's really rock and roll sounding. He's bending a lot of strings, and he's got this distortion guitar kind of thing that the rock guys were using. And I knew a bunch of people that said, oh, that's not really jazz music. But, you know, my definition of jazz is very, very inclusive. And for me, jazz is about a way of looking at music that includes any kind of influences that you can mold with anything else that you like to create your own unique form of expression. And I think John McLaughlin and this group did that brilliantly. It was one of my very, very favorite groups. A lot of rock musicians came into jazz because of that band, and I think that ended up being a good thing. Other musicians, there was a fellow named Al Di Meola who played with Chick Corea. A similar kind of thing, the same thing, only different, if that makes sense, but the idea of this electric guitar, loud, energetic rock approach to jazz. And there was a couple fellas named Larry Carlton in particular who were these studio musicians. I think at one point Billboard used to have the top 100 albums or something, and I think Larry Carlton was on over 70 of the top 100 albums at some point back in the 70s. But when he wasn't making a fortune playing on everybody else's records, he was a great sort of fusion-y, jazz-influenced guitar player in his own right. And not to disrespect those guys, but just because they're coming at the end of the thing, if we could hit that next slide. And here we are now. We're in this brilliant time when, because there's so much music available to us to be influenced by through the internet, that there are so many guitar players. When I was trying to make this list, I gave up. My iTunes at home just has a guitar section that's as long as your arm. And so I just picked a few names that I really like. And every time I hear Pat Metheny and John Scofield and all those other players play, I'm just struck with how brilliant they all are. And one of the things that down here in the little box here, the influences, you know, if you think about it, where jazz came from in New Orleans with its sort of very limited geographical set of DNA, to where it is now, where, you know, hip-hop music and funk and R&B and electronica and world music and the music from Africa and Brazil and Asia and all these places are now fair game for jazz musicians. And again, just a little snippet of something by Pat Metheny called Minuano, and you'll hear some of this. Do I have this on here? Oh, there it is. Okay. Oops. There we go. Again, boy, I wish you could play more of that, but we have to keep on time. But some of these influences are even reflected in the instruments that we play. And you've seen Rich and I play some different guitars. This guitar is considered a solid body guitar because it's essentially solid, and it does have this arch top to it. But it's basically solid. It weighs probably more than those do. But it has a pickup on it that, well, these are the electric guitar pickups, so they sound like an electric guitar. But it also has a little jobby under the bridge here that senses the acoustic sound of the instrument, so it can also sound like an acoustic guitar, and you know what that is? Hooks up to a computer. So I can also plug this guitar into a computer and access through synthesizers an unlimited palette of any other kind of guitar sounds. So this is sort of the physical manifestation, I guess, of the evolution of the guitar in jazz since we started with Eddie Lang up until now. And if I could get Rich to come up, we're going to play one more tune for you, just a short version of a tune from the 60s called Sunny. And it was kind of an R&B hit that a lot of jazz musicians like to play. And I think we're going to play this, and I wanted to leave a bit of time for some questions at the end. So hope you enjoyed. Do I have a guitar? Oh, here. A minor, right?
Okay.
You think I have you? Got it. couple minutes. Anybody have any questions?
What kind of answer?
Rich is the person to blame for these. These amps are called, they're made by a company called Quilter, and I like them because they sound great. I can lift them up with my pinky, and they just sound really good.
QSC power amps, you've heard of those. They're high end. They go on tour with Madonna. That's that's Quilter, a sound company, and he is a guitar player. He's always wanted to make amplifiers.
How much is one of those sweet things?
That one lives for $900.
And it has really cool lights. I mean, it's just awesome lights.